Alex Harper had only just settled into his new home when the first violation notice arrived. It was a crisp, official-looking letter, printed on paper that felt designed to intimidate. He opened it with unbounded curiosity, but that quickly morphed into disbelief. The Homeowners Association claimed his lawn was too long, a minor detail, given that it was just a few blades of grass swaying in the late afternoon breeze. "What the heck?" he muttered, puzzled. He was certain he'd read his property deed more times than he could count, and it clearly stated he wasn't governed by the HOA. Who cared about a few extra inches of grass? Surely, this was a clerical error. But as days passed, more letters began to flood in, each more accusatory than the last. "Your mailbox does not align with community standards," stated one. "Your shutters, while charming, are out of compliance," read another. Alex was baffled. How could they even know about his mailbox or shutters? He hadn't met a single neighbor yet. Dismissing the notices as a prank, he ignored the growing pile of paperwork. It was only when he started receiving fines that the situation turned serious. Ominous threats accompanied each new letter. Failure to comply would result in legal action. Alex's blood boiled. This had to be a mistake. He had done everything by the book. Frustrated, he decided to contact the HOA. After navigating through the convoluted phone system, he was finally connected to Natalie, the HOA president. "Mr. Harper. How can I assist you?" Her voice radiated condescension, as if she were addressing a child. "There's been a mistake. I don't even fall under your jurisdiction," he explained, hoping reason would prevail. Natalie chuckled, her laughter dripping with disdain. "All properties in Maple Grove are subject to our oversight. You'll need to comply, or we will take further actions. It's for the community's sake, after all." Her condescending attitude sparked something in Alex, an ember of defiance. "But I'm not a part of this community you speak of. I never signed up for this." "Doesn't matter. The rules apply to you just the same," she snapped, cutting him off. Her eyes glittered with something resembling triumph as she hung up. Days turned into a blur of escalating notices. Each letter felt like a shovel of dirt on a grave he never dug, a grave of his peaceful life. The threats piled on, with each new mail delivery causing a sinking feeling in his stomach. He started noticing the neighborhood slowly turning against him. Where there was once friendly interaction during his moving in, he now received cold stares and whispered conversations that ceased upon his arrival. "Might as well wear a target on my back," he muttered to himself as he stood outside, clenching one of the infuriating letters in his hand. It had become painfully obvious. This wasn't simple bureaucracy, it was a campaign of intimidation. Alex was cornered, the walls closing in around him, and the facade of community that once comforted him had morphed into a prison of compliance. But Alex refused to become another victim of tyranny. He refused to back down. He would confront Natalie and the HOA directly. Placing his fists firmly on his hips, he took a deep breath and vowed to bring this battle to their doorstep. As dark clouds rolled in overhead, a storm was brewing, one aimed not at helpless skies, but at the very heart of Maple Grove's tyrannical HOA. As dark clouds rolled in overhead, a storm was brewing, one aimed not at helpless skies, but at the very heart of Maple Grove's tyrannical HOA. With a renewed sense of determination surging through him, Alex decided he would pay Natalie a visit at the HOA office. Perhaps it was time to confront her face to face, armed with the evidence of his exemption from her demands. Emotions churned in him, frustration, anger, but above all, a fierce resolve. The following day, he marched into the HOA office, clutching a folder filled with documents, his property deed, past communication, violation notices, all a testament to his case. The interior was sterile, the walls adorned with chromatic photos of perfectly manicured lawns and smiling families, a scene that felt like a mirage in his current reality. Natalie, seated behind her desk and surrounded by an ambience of mild chaos, barely glanced up as he walked in. The marks of power lingered in her gaze, as though she relished the control she wielded over the community. She looked up finally, her expression shifting to one of feigned surprise. "Oh, Mr. Harper. To what do I owe the pleasure?" The saccharine tone made his stomach churn. "I'm here to discuss these violation notices," he began, voice steady but his heart racing. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding my property's jurisdiction." She leaned back, the corners of her mouth twitching into an almost imperceptible smirk. "Misunderstanding? Hardly. You see, our community thrives on rules. They're in place for a reason." "Reason or control?" he shot back, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "You don't have authority over my home. I can prove it." Natalie's eyes narrowed, no longer amused. You think a few papers will protect you? This is a community, Mr. Harper. Communities need structure. You can't just desecrate that structure and expect to live harmoniously. Desecrate? He scoffed. You're talking about my color choices and lawn length, not a work of art. I'm not breaking any laws. Her smile faded, replaced by steeliness. It's not about laws, it's about compliance. If you continue down this road of defiance, I can assure you it will not end well for you. Our residents value guidelines, and so should you. The way she spoke made it clear she was ready to put him in his place. But he wasn't backing down. With a flicker of courage, he pushed his folder across the desk toward her, the document sliding to a stop just before her fingers. Read it. I'm legally exempt. I don't belong to your community because I didn't sign any agreements. Natalie's eyes darkened as she reviewed the documents in silence, her face morphing into annoyance. In the end, it doesn't matter what you think you proved. We enforce community standards. Ignore this at your own peril, Mr. Harper. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Alex felt a surge of adrenaline, a realization striking him square in the chest. She was playing a game, and he'd unwittingly entered the arena. Leaving the office, the weight of her words washed over him. Non-compliance will lead to more fines. Though he braced himself for her wrath, he couldn't shake the growing sense that this was more than just about his lawn or shutters. The insidious nature of the HOA was darker than he had realized, woven with threats and attempts at social isolation. As days passed, his life turned into a living nightmare. New letters arrived almost daily, detailing vague infractions. Neighbors he once waved to now looked away, as if he were an undesired anomaly. Each cold shoulder deepened his determination, but it felt like he was losing the very essence of what it meant to feel at home. Things escalated. One afternoon, while he was examining the latest notice on his porch, he spotted a group of residents across the street. They didn't seem to notice him as they stood clustered together, faces etched with frowns as they cast glances at his house. He could feel the chill of isolation creeping over him. Were they discussing him? In that cold moment, he understood that Natalie wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was a puppeteer, and he was the unwitting puppet on display. They were crafting a narrative, painting him as a troublemaker, someone who wouldn't toe the line, further isolating him from his neighbors. The realization sent a shudder down his spine. It was clear he needed to plan his next move carefully. He would not just fight back, he would expose the darkness he knew lurked beneath the HOA's facade. Gathering evidence was essential, so he turned to the internet, searching for others who had suffered under the HOA's iron grip. Brewing discontent bubbled within him. He grabbed a notepad and began jotting down names as he scoured forums and community boards, finding stories that mirrored his own experiences. With each tale of intimidation and abuse, his resolve grew stronger. He wouldn't be just another victim, he was ready to turn the tide. Time to launch a counteroffensive, he muttered to himself, excitement mingling with apprehension. The odds may have been stacked against him, but if he could gather enough voices, their tyranny could be unveiled. And with that thought, the way forward became a glimmer of hope on the horizon, despite the storm that was surely brewing around him. The odds may have been stacked against him, but if he could gather enough voices, their tyranny could be unveiled. And with that thought, the way forward became a glimmer of hope on the horizon, despite the storm that was surely brewing around him. Over the next few days, Alex became a man on a mission. He reached out to fellow residents via online forums and community groups, carefully crafting a message that emphasized unity against the oppressive practices of the HOA. His content began with his own experience but resonated with the widespread discomfort he sensed among others who lived under the HOA's thumb. "Let's reclaim our community," he typed, fingers flying over the keyboard. "We don't have to live in fear of arbitrary rules that dictate our homes. If you feel like I do, join me. We can organize and bring the truth to light." He hit send and jumped back, anticipation thrumming in his chest. With each new message that appeared in his inbox, support, shared stories, grievances, his confidence surged. Residents began to file in, voicing their own experiences of intimidation or judgment from the HOA, sharing images of their similarly non-compliant yards. A thread of connection began to weave through the community, a pulse that beat brighter with every new participant. Slowly, he learned of a few key figures who were brave enough to make their voices heard, like Lucas, the kind-hearted but disgruntled retiree who thrived in his garden despite the rules against it, and Maria, a single mother who had faced fines for the color of her front door, one of the few things that made her feel at home after a difficult divorce. "Let's meet," Alex suggested in a group chat that simmered with excitement and nervous energy. He proposed an informal gathering at his house, somewhere they could speak freely without the prying eyes of the HOA lurking around every corner. As dusk settled that Friday evening, the first few arrivals trickled in. There was an undercurrent of anticipation. The tension of camaraderie filled the air as the small group exchanged stories of their battles against the HOA. The more they shared, the easier it became to laugh about the ridiculousness of their violations, a defiant spark igniting where there once had been fear. "Can you believe they fined me for the bluebird feeder in front of my house?" Maria chuckled incredulously, shaking her head. "It's not a violation, it's a blessing." "Or how about my flamingo lawn ornaments? All I wanted was a splash of color. Now I'm disturbing the aesthetic flow or whatever they called it." Lucas chimed in with a grin that lit up his weathered face. Laughter blossomed, and Alex felt hope taking root among them. Despite the gloominess of the HOA's grip, it was evidently clear that they could create a united front. "This whole thing is absurd," Alex finally said, drawing the group's attention. "We shouldn't have to fight for our homes like this. We're not troublemakers, we're individuals with diverse tastes and backgrounds. It's time to stand up against this." A fervor built in the room. As night fell, the small gathering turned strategic, organizing their thoughts into a collective movement. They brainstormed ideas, petitions, outreach to local news, awareness events, and a schedule to confront Natalie and the HOA directly. As they talked, Alex felt a fire burning within him, a passion ignited by the strength of their shared purpose. They were tired of the fear that had loomed over their neighborhood, stifling their individuality. They were ready to take a stand, to reshape the narrative of what it meant to be part of a community. By the time the last guest bid farewell, the night had grown late, but the energy between them crackled with potential. They had a plan, a brave, audacious plan to reclaim their voices and refuse to be cast out by the HOA's unrelenting power. When the sun rose the next day, Alex stood in his front yard, surveying the scene, not as a troubled homeowner, but as a spark igniting the movement that would alter the very fabric of Maple Grove. He glanced over at the humble bluebird feeder, for a moment imagining the flutter of wings, a symbol of resilience and freedom. With the voices of his neighbors echoing in his mind, he knew this was just the beginning. They would confront the HOA together, armed with unity and a shared belief in the right to live life as they saw fit. As shadows of doubt faded, he felt ready to rise against the storm and emerge victorious. And so, with the weight of his experiences fueling him, he picked up his phone and got to work, organizing the details of their first meeting with the Homeowners Association, forming a coalition, ready to face whatever intimidation came their way. It was time to end the era of fear and usher in a reign of rebellion that would echo through the community for years to come. It was time to end the era of fear and usher in a reign of rebellion that would echo through the community for years to come. With steely determination coursing through him, Alex spent the next few days gathering signatures for the petition, rallying support from neighbors who had long felt silenced. Each door he knocked on felt like an act of defiance, a step closer to liberation. When the day finally arrived for their confrontation with the HOA, a palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. Alex stood outside the HOA office, flanked by fellow residents who had once regarded him from afar. They were now allies, united under the banner of their shared struggle. The sun shone brightly, casting a hopeful glow over the group, yet dark clouds loomed ominously in the distance, a stark reminder of the storm that could erupt at any moment. As they stepped into the office, the sterile environment felt different. It wasn't just a place of bureaucracy anymore, it was the battleground for their fight. Natalie sat behind her desk, her demeanor instantly shifting to feigned neutrality, though her eyes sparkled with thinly veiled annoyance upon spotting the gathered crowd. "Mr. Harper," she began, her voice smooth like silk yet biting beneath the surface, "I see you've brought some friends today. What an unexpected turn of events." "Unexpected? Not at all, Natalie," Alex replied, taking a step forward that served both as a display of bravery and a challenge. "We're here to discuss the numerous violations, but more importantly, to address the oppressive regime you've created within our community." Murmurs rippled through the assembly behind him, emboldening him further. "Today, we are not just representing ourselves, but every family and individual who has felt marginalized, judged, and ridiculed for wanting to express their identity." Natalie's expression hardened, the smirk faltering as she regained her composure. "You should reconsider your approach, Mr. Harper. Disruption is hardly the way to achieve your goals, if that's what you're aiming for." "We don't seek disruption, we seek change," Alex retorted, rising above her attempt to intimidate him. He gestured to his neighbors, who stood resolute, their hands clutching the signed petition. We've gathered our voices. Together, we're calling for greater transparency, accountability, and the right to express our individuality without fear. With a flourish, he held out the petition, the weight of the paper strong in his hand. Natalie's eyes narrowed as she accepted the document, the air thick with tension and the looming threat of conflict. "This is ludicrous," she muttered, scanning the signatures, disbelief invading her calm demeanor. "You think a few bold words on paper will change how this community operates? Haven't you learned your lesson yet?" "I refuse to be intimidated," Alex declared, the fervor of his voice echoing through the office. "And neither will my neighbors." But before any more words were exchanged, the air electric with confrontation, a deafening crash broke the moment. The storm, which had steadily gathered outside, unleashed its fury. Thunder rumbled like an ominous warning, echoing their internal clash. Natalie's facade began to crack. "You think this is just about you? That this community was built to be shaped by a few discontented souls? You've crossed into dangerous territory." Without hesitating, Alex leaned in, raising his voice above the thunder. "No, Natalie. It's not just about us, it's about everyone who calls Maple Grove home. It's about fostering a true community that thrives on diversity instead of stifling it with fear." Suddenly, the storm outside became a metaphor for their struggle. Rain lashed against the windows, turning the office into a turbulent theater, each drop pounding as a reminder they were fighting for something worth protecting. As lightning illuminated the room, the image of a neighborhood marginalized by fear and intimidation flashed in Alex's mind, homes cast in shadow, families retreating behind closed doors. He could not let that image become reality. But in an unexpected twist, just when it seemed Natalie would retaliate or further entrench her position, a voice broke through the tension. It was Ruth, a longtime resident who had always kept her head down. "She's right, you know. We've been afraid, worried about our homes and our standing. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. We shouldn't have to choose between following rules and being ourselves." As Ruth stepped forward, more residents started to join her. One by one, they echoed their grievances, recounting stories of humiliation and unfairness, each voice rising in a solidified chorus that filled the room, washing over the remnants of Natalie's control. Realizing she was losing control of the situation, Natalie faltered, her mask slipping to reveal frustration. "This isn't how it works. You can't just take over our community board with a mob." "Is that what we are, Natalie?" Alex asked, his voice low but steady. "A mob? Or are we simply families who want to be heard? People who value community just like you?" Outside, the tempest raged, but in the heart of that office, a storm of resolve was brewing. With each resident voicing their truth, the very foundation of the HOA began to quake, threatening to upheave the power dynamics that had kept them in check for far too long. Suddenly, with a final crash of thunder, a determined and defiant cheer erupted from the gathered crowd. The walls that had contained them began to reverberate with the possibility of change. In the electric aftermath of their confrontation, hope began to reclaim its place in Maple Grove. Together, they would stand, undeterred by the history of oppression that haunted their community. They were ready to create a true neighborhood rooted in understanding, acceptance, and freedom, from the shadows of fear that had once loomed over them. As Alex stepped back, he took a deep breath, drawn into the collective heartbeat of a community awakening. It wasn't just about today, it was about paving the path for the future. The storm outside continued to rage, but miraculously, he felt the sunlight breaking through the clouds, brighter days awaited, and hearts were finally ready to embrace their true colors.